Thanks. My name is Kim Paz. I'm from Central New Jersey, and I'm a researcher, and I love your hair, by the way. I'm the proud granddaughter of a bus driver for the PAT transit system in Pittsburgh. I'm living in this very congested state of New Jersey, and I make trips to Europe every now and then, and I see how good the transit system is there and how much they've invested in it. And I think if we ever have another oil crisis, we're going to be a third world country compared to them. So I'd like to know if you have any vision for updating the infrastructure of our mass transit system and bringing it into the 21st century, and perhaps making use of the infrastructure that we already have that was built during the 60s.
Great question, and boy, what a timely question with the bridge collapse and the tragedy of that infrastructure failure, because that's what it was. And let me just speak broadly for a minute, and then specifically about mass transit. I have been advocating long-term funding to begin to repair, maintain, and build new infrastructure. We are living off the investments that our parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents made, especially if you're in the Northeast or the Midwest. You know, if you use the L or you use the subway, you are basically taking advantage of what previous generations of Chicagoans or New Yorkers were willing to pay for. And it is absolutely critical to our economic development that we improve our infrastructure. Now, I view infrastructure as being not only physical, but virtual. We've got to do much more on bridges and roads and airports and mass transit and ports and wastewater and clean water. We have about $1 trillion of unmet needs, and every year the American Society of Civil Engineers gives us a grade on our infrastructure, and we're always failing. You know, some parts are failing worse than other parts, but we're always failing. And so we need to focus on our physical infrastructure, and we have got to have universal high-speed broadband access. The very first bill I introduced when I became a senator was to expand broadband in underserved urban and rural areas in New York. Because there are places in New York City and places in the suburbs and some of our cities upstate where you can get anywhere you need to go in milliseconds. Then there are places where, as you know, you can't. The Bush administration doesn't believe in any kind of infrastructure support, whether it's physical or virtual. In 2000, we were leading the world in broadband access and universality. We're down to 25 now. That is an economic and security issue. So I am committed to this. I think we should look at what some other countries have done. The European Union has used 50-year bonding authority, but we have to have a federal, state, local, private sector partnership, and we've got to do this in a hurry, because every year that goes by that we don't repair, we're going to have more problems, and we're going to be missing opportunities. In particular, mass transit must become a priority of our country. Now, not every part of the country is as suited for it as many parts are. Certainly the East Coast, our bigger cities in the Midwest, our West Coast. But the fact is that we cannot continue to have the congestion and the lost productivity time that comes from all of our traffic problems. We're losing money, and people are losing time, which is also pretty precious. And we are wasting oil, and we are adding to our energy problems and contributing to global warming. We have had to fight for the last 6.5 years just to keep Amtrak alive. Just to keep funding at current operating levels, PATH and MTA and all the rest of our mass transit systems. If we could come up with this kind of long-term bonding funding mechanism that I think would make a lot of sense, mass transit would be at the top of my list for what I would like to see states and localities invest in. And I would like to see regional operations. Part of the reason we don't have high-speed rail is because our tracks are so old that they can't be maintained and they're not safe to get above a certain speed. Part of our problem with mass transit is that it's expensive to do what we have to do. Now, we're finally starting some long overdue mass transit projects in New York City, like the 2nd Avenue subway. It's going to take years and years, but at least we're getting started. And then we've got to make sure, as we do more mass transit, we figure out ways to encourage and even incentivize people to use it. Because, you know, the argument against mass transit always is, well, you know, not that many people use it. Well, that sure isn't true in New York. And it isn't true on a lot of the premier, you know, routes with Amtrak from, you know, Boston to Washington, even down to Florida, on the West Coast and elsewhere. So this needs to be kind of a public education and investment effort. But let me just end, because I know they told me I'm supposed to go to some green room to get ready with all the other people. I don't know what that means, but I will. But let me just end with this. I mean, every election is about the future. Every election is about the future. And it is about what kind of change we want for our country. I have been fighting for change my entire life, often against some pretty tough odds. I mean, I'm very proud of my record of service and my record in public service. But what's really going to matter in this election